Admiral Marcus Johnson was not just another name in the U.S. Navy. He was a legend, a symbol of resilience and determination. Born into a world where opportunities for black individuals were scarce, especially within the military, Marcus had faced challenges from the very beginning. Growing up in a small town, he often heard people say that dreams like his, of becoming an officer, let alone an admiral, were impossible. But Marcus didn't listen. He believed in himself when others doubted him, and that belief carried him through years of hard work, sacrifice, and perseverance. From the moment he enlisted, Marcus stood out, not because he sought attention, but because his dedication was unmatched. While others complained about early mornings or grueling drills, Marcus embraced them. He saw every challenge as a chance to prove himself, not just to others, but to himself. His superiors noticed his commitment and pushed him to take on leadership roles, even when it meant stepping into positions traditionally held by white officers. Each promotion came with whispers and raised eyebrows, but Marcus silenced critics with results. Whether it was leading rescue missions during natural disasters or strategizing complex operations overseas, he earned respect through sheer competence. But success didn't come without struggle. There were moments when racism reared its ugly head, in the form of snide remarks, unfair assignments, or being overlooked for promotions he deserved. Yet, Marcus never let bitterness consume him. Instead, he channeled those experiences into fuel for his journey. He reminded himself why he started, to pave the way for those who would come after him. And so, he kept climbing, breaking barriers one step at a time until he reached the rank of Admiral, a title that made history. Now, decades later, Admiral Johnson's legacy stretched far beyond his achievements. He wasn't just a decorated officer, he was a role model for young sailors, particularly minorities who dreamed of rising through the ranks. People admired not only his accomplishments but also his character. He was known for his calm demeanor, sharp mind, and unwavering integrity. Even outside the military, his story inspired civilians who saw in him a testament to what could be achieved with grit and grace. On this particular day, Admiral Johnson found himself preparing for yet another milestone. After years of service, he was set to receive a prestigious award in Washington, D.C., honoring his contributions to national security and humanitarian efforts. It was a well-deserved recognition, though Marcus humbly insisted that the honor belonged to everyone who served alongside him. As he packed his bags and double-checked his itinerary, little did he know that this trip would bring an unexpected chapter to his storied life, a chapter that would remind him, and the world, of how far society had come, and how much farther it still needed to go. The morning of the flight began like any other for Admiral Marcus Johnson. He woke up early, dressed in his crisp Navy uniform, and carefully pinned on his medals, one for each mission, each battle, each moment of sacrifice. As he stood in front of the mirror, he took a deep breath. Today wasn't just another day. It was a chance to reflect on all he had achieved and the lives he had touched along the way. With that thought in mind, he grabbed his carry-on bag and headed to the airport. When Admiral Johnson arrived at the terminal, heads turned almost immediately. His presence commanded respect, not because he demanded it, but because it radiated naturally. People recognized him, not always by name, but by the weight of his uniform and the rows of shiny medals across his chest. Some passengers stopped to thank him for his service, their voices filled with sincerity. A young boy even approached shyly, asking if he could shake the Admiral's hand. Marcus smiled warmly, crouching down to meet the child at eye level. "It's an honor to serve," he said softly before sending the boy back to his parents with a pat on the shoulder. Boarding the plane felt surreal. After years of flying military aircraft or traveling via government transport, stepping onto a commercial flight felt unfamiliar. Still, Marcus appreciated the simplicity of blending in with ordinary travelers, even if only for a few hours. When he reached the gate, the airline staff greeted him courteously, scanning his ticket and confirming his seat assignment in first class. Everything seemed routine, until it wasn't. As Marcus walked toward the front of the plane, one of the flight attendants approached him hesitantly. She held her tablet close, glancing between it and the Admiral as though unsure how to proceed. Finally, she spoke. "Sir, I'm so sorry, but there seems to have been a mistake," she said, her tone apologetic yet firm. "Your first-class seat isn't available anymore. We'll need to move you to economy." Marcus froze for a split second, processing her words. Mistake? How could this happen? He glanced at his ticket again, double-checking the details. Sure enough, it clearly stated first class. Yet here he was, being told there was no room for him in the section he had paid for. For a moment, anger flickered in his chest, but he quickly pushed it aside. This wasn't the first time he'd faced such treatment, though he hoped it would be the last. Instead of arguing, he nodded politely, masking his disappointment behind a calm expression. "Very well," he replied, his voice steady. "I'll take whatever seat you can offer." The attendant led him to the back of the plane, where economy class stretched out in narrow rows. As Marcus settled into his new seat, a cramped spot near the middle of the cabin, he couldn't help but notice the irony. Here he was, a man who had dedicated his life to serving his country, reduced to squeezing into a tiny space while others enjoyed the luxury he had rightfully reserved. Passengers around him whispered among themselves, some casting sympathetic glances his way. One elderly woman leaned over and quietly asked, "Is everything okay, sir?" Marcus gave her a reassuring smile. "Just a mix-up," he said lightly, brushing off the incident. But deep down, he knew it wasn't just a mix-up, it was something more. And unbeknownst to him, someone else on the plane was watching closely, ready to step in where justice seemed absent. A few rows ahead of Admiral Johnson sat Captain Sarah Collins, a seasoned Navy pilot who had recently returned from an overseas deployment. Dressed in her casual clothes rather than her uniform, she blended in with the other passengers, except for the small pin on her jacket that marked her as a member of the military. She hadn't noticed Admiral Johnson at first. She was too busy scrolling through emails and thinking about home. But when he walked past her row, something caught her eye, the gleam of his medals under the cabin lights. Sarah immediately recognized him. How could she not? Admiral Marcus Johnson's story was legendary within the Navy. Every recruit learned about his rise through the ranks, his courage during impossible missions, and his quiet determination to break barriers. To see him in person was surreal, like meeting a figure from history books brought to life. When he stopped near the front of the plane and spoke briefly with a flight attendant, Sarah watched curiously. At first, she assumed they were discussing routine matters, perhaps a seating preference or a request for extra legroom. But then she saw the change in his expression. The Admiral's face remained calm, almost unreadable, but there was a flicker of something else. Disappointment, maybe, or resignation. The flight attendant gestured toward the back of the plane, and Marcus nodded politely before turning around. That's when it hit Sarah. He wasn't heading to first class. He was walking past it, moving further down the aisle until he disappeared into the economy section. Her stomach tightened. Something wasn't right. For a moment, Sarah hesitated. Maybe she had misunderstood. Perhaps there was a valid reason for the switch, a mechanical issue with the seats, or some administrative error that would soon be corrected. But as the minutes ticked by and no one addressed the situation, her unease grew. She couldn't shake the feeling that what she'd just witnessed was wrong, not just inconvenient, but deeply unfair. Here was a man who had given decades of his life to protect this country, being treated as though his presence didn't matter. When the plane began its taxi to the runway, Sarah's mind raced. Should she say something? What could she possibly do? She wasn't one to make scenes, but the thought of staying silent made her feel complicit in whatever injustice had occurred. Finally, as the safety briefing droned on in the background, she glanced over her shoulder toward the economy section. Though she couldn't see him anymore, she knew exactly where Admiral Johnson was sitting, and she couldn't ignore the nagging voice inside her head telling her to act. Sarah leaned back in her seat, gripping the armrests tightly. She thought about her own experiences as a woman in the military, the subtle biases, and occasional outright discrimination she'd faced. Those moments had taught her how isolating it could feel to be dismissed or overlooked. And now, watching someone as accomplished as Admiral Johnson endure similar treatment felt unbearable. If she didn't speak up, who would? The decision crystallized in her mind. This wasn't just about one man. It was about standing up for what was right, even when it was uncomfortable. As the plane lifted off the ground, Sarah took a deep breath. She didn't know yet what she would say or how the airline staff might react. All she knew was that she couldn't let the moment pass without trying. After all, the Navy had taught her many things, but one lesson stood above the rest. True leadership meant taking action when others stayed silent. And so, as the seatbelt sign turned off and the cabin buzzed with low chatter, Sarah unbuckled her seatbelt, squared her shoulders, and prepared to do what needed to be done for Admiral Johnson, for herself, and for every service member who deserved better. As soon as the seatbelt sign turned off, Captain Sarah Collins stood up from her seat. Her heart was pounding, but she forced herself to move with purpose. She walked briskly toward the front of the plane, where a group of flight attendants stood near the first-class curtain. They were chatting quietly among themselves, unaware of the storm about to break over them. Sarah took a deep breath and stepped forward. "Excuse me," she said firmly, her voice cutting through their conversation like a knife. The attendants turned to look at her, their expressions shifting from casual indifference to mild surprise. One of them, a young woman with an apologetic smile, stepped forward. "Can I help you?" she asked politely. Sarah didn't waste time with pleasantries. "Yes, you can," she replied, her tone calm but unyielding. "I need to talk to you about Admiral Marcus Johnson." At the mention of his name, the attendants exchanged uneasy glances. Clearly, they knew exactly who she meant. The same young woman who had greeted her earlier spoke again, her voice tinged with nervousness. "Oh, yes, Admiral Johnson. We're so sorry about the mix-up with his seat. It was just..." But Sarah cut her off before she could finish. "A mix-up," she repeated, raising an eyebrow. "Let me make sure I understand this correctly. You're telling me that one of the most decorated officers in the U.S. Navy, a man who has dedicated his entire life to serving this country, was denied access to the seat he purchased because of a mix-up?" The attendant faltered, clearly caught off guard by Sarah's directness. "Well, it wasn't intentional," she began, but Sarah wasn't having it. "It doesn't matter if it was intentional or not," Sarah shot back, her voice rising slightly but remaining controlled. "What matters is that it happened. And what also matters is how you handle it now." She glanced around at the other passengers, many of whom were watching the exchange with growing interest. Some nodded approvingly, while others leaned closer, eager to hear what would happen next. Sarah continued, her words sharp yet measured. "Admiral Johnson deserves better than this. He deserves respect, not just because of his rank or his medals, but because of who he is as a person. If anyone on this plane belongs in first class, it's him. So here's what I suggest. You fix this immediately. Move him to the seat he reserved, and offer him a sincere apology." By now, the entire cabin seemed to be listening. Conversations had faded into silence, replaced by the weight of Sarah's words. Several passengers clapped softly, murmuring their agreement. Even some of the flight attendants looked embarrassed, realizing the gravity of the situation. One older attendant stepped forward, her face flushed with regret. "You're absolutely right," she admitted, her voice trembling slightly. "This never should have happened. Please allow us to correct this oversight. We'll move Admiral Johnson to first class right away." Sarah crossed her arms, studying the woman carefully. "Good," she said simply. "But don't stop there. Apologize to him personally, and mean it, because actions speak louder than words, especially when trust has been broken." With that, Sarah turned and headed back toward her seat, leaving the airline staff scrambling to rectify the situation. Passengers watched her go, their faces reflecting a mixture of admiration and disbelief. No one expected such a bold confrontation, least of all the attendants. But Sarah didn't care about the attention. She cared about doing what was right. As she settled back into her seat, she felt a small sense of satisfaction. Justice hadn't been served yet, but at least someone had finally spoken up. And sometimes that was enough to spark real change. In the weeks following the flight, Admiral Marcus Johnson and Captain Sarah Collins found themselves drawn together by more than just the shared experience of that day. What began as a simple exchange of emails quickly blossomed into a genuine friendship built on mutual respect and admiration. They discovered they had much in common, not just their service to the Navy, but also their passion for mentoring others and advocating for change within the military. Their conversations often revolved around the challenges faced by minority service members and women in leadership roles. Both had experienced moments when they felt underestimated or dismissed because of who they were. For Admiral Johnson, it was the subtle biases he encountered early in his career, while for Captain Collins, it was navigating an environment where female pilots were still outnumbered. Yet neither had let those obstacles define them. Instead, they used their struggles as fuel to push forward and open doors for others. One afternoon, over coffee at a quiet cafe near the Pentagon, Admiral Johnson leaned back in his chair and sighed thoughtfully. "You know, Sarah," he said, stirring his cup slowly, "what happened on that plane wasn't just about me. It was a reminder that no matter how far we've come, there's still work to be done. And if we don't step up now, who will?" Sarah nodded, her expression serious yet hopeful. "Exactly," she replied. "That's why I think we should do something meaningful with this platform we've been given. People are listening right now. They want to see action, not just words." The idea came naturally. Why not create a mentorship program aimed at supporting young recruits from underrepresented backgrounds? The two envisioned workshops, networking events, and one-on-one coaching sessions designed to help rising sailors and officers navigate the complexities of military life. They wanted to teach these individuals not only how to succeed, but also how to lead with integrity and empathy. With Admiral Johnson's influence and Captain Collins' energy, they quickly gained support from senior military officials and veteran organizations. Within months, their initiative, dubbed Pathways to Leadership, was launched. The program focused on three key areas: professional development, diversity advocacy, and mental health awareness. Recruits participated in seminars led by seasoned leaders like Admiral Johnson himself, learning everything from strategic decision-making to handling adversity with grace. But what truly set Pathways to Leadership apart was its emphasis on storytelling. Every session included personal anecdotes from mentors about their own journeys, the triumphs, the setbacks, and the lessons learned along the way. Admiral Johnson often recounted his early days in the Navy, describing how he turned rejection into motivation. Captain Collins, meanwhile, spoke candidly about overcoming self-doubt and finding strength in vulnerability. These stories resonated deeply with participants, many of whom saw reflections of their own struggles in the mentors' experiences. As the program grew, so did the bond between Admiral Johnson and Captain Collins. Their partnership became a model of collaboration across generations and ranks. Younger recruits admired the dynamic duo, seeing in them a blueprint for allyship and teamwork. Veterans praised their efforts, saying initiatives like this were long overdue. Even civilians outside the military took notice, inviting the pair to speak at conferences and community events about the importance of fostering inclusivity in all fields. Despite their growing responsibilities, both remained grounded. Admiral Johnson continued to remind everyone that true leadership meant serving others without expecting anything in return. Captain Collins echoed this sentiment, emphasizing that courage wasn't about being fearless, it was about acting despite fear. Together, they proved that progress wasn't achieved alone. It required collective effort, empathy, and a willingness to listen. By the time the first year of Pathways to Leadership concluded, hundreds of recruits had benefited from the program. Many credited Admiral Johnson and Captain Collins with helping them find their footing in the military world, a world that could sometimes feel overwhelming. For the two friends, the reward wasn't fame or accolades. It was knowing they had planted seeds of hope and resilience in the next generation of leaders. And as they stood side by side at the program's anniversary celebration, watching young sailors mingle and laugh, they couldn't help but feel proud of what they had built, a legacy rooted not in titles or medals, but in the enduring power of connection and compassion. The flight attendants moved quickly after Captain Sarah Collins' confrontation, their earlier hesitation replaced by a flurry of activity. They approached Admiral Marcus Johnson with visible urgency, their faces painted with regret. One of them, a senior attendant, knelt beside his seat in the economy section and spoke softly but earnestly. "Admiral Johnson, we cannot apologize enough for what happened earlier. It was unacceptable, and we are truly sorry. Please allow us to move you to first class right now. It's the least we can do." Passengers nearby craned their necks to watch the interaction, their curiosity piqued. Some leaned forward, whispering to each other about how things would unfold. Would the Admiral accept the offer, or would he decline, given the dignified calm he had shown throughout the ordeal? To everyone's surprise, Admiral Johnson shook his head gently, a faint smile playing on his lips. "Thank you for your apology," he said, his voice steady and warm. "But I'm fine where I am. There's no need to move me." His response left the attendants momentarily speechless. They exchanged uncertain glances, unsure if they should press further or respect his decision. When it became clear that the Admiral wasn't going to budge, the senior attendant straightened up, her expression filled with both admiration and lingering guilt. "Sir, please know that we deeply regret this incident. If there's anything else we can do to make this flight more comfortable for you, don't hesitate to let us know." Admiral Johnson nodded graciously. "I appreciate that," he replied. "And I want to thank you for addressing the matter so promptly. What matters most isn't where I sit. It's how we treat each other along the way." His words hung in the air, simple yet profound, resonating with everyone who heard them. As the attendants returned to the front of the plane, murmurs rippled through the cabin. Passengers began discussing what had just happened, their voices tinged with awe. A businessman seated across the aisle leaned over and said to his neighbor, "Did you hear what he just said? That man is incredible." He could have made a scene, but instead, he turned it into a lesson. Others chimed in, sharing their thoughts. An elderly woman dabbed at her eyes with a tissue, visibly moved. "It takes a lot of strength to handle something like that with such grace," she whispered to no one in particular. The mood in the cabin shifted. What had started as tension and discomfort transformed into something deeper: respect, admiration, and even inspiration. Moments later, Admiral Johnson stood up, not to switch seats, but to address the entire plane. The sudden movement caught everyone's attention, and soon all eyes were on him. Standing tall despite the cramped quarters, he cleared his throat lightly before speaking. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, his voice carrying effortlessly through the quiet cabin, "I want to thank each of you for your kindness today. Many of you have expressed your concern, and I deeply appreciate it. But let me be clear, I don't expect special treatment because of my rank or my medals. What I hope for all of us, is mutual respect, regardless of who we are or where we come from." He paused, letting his words sink in before continuing. "Today reminded me that while progress has been made, challenges still remain. Yet it also showed me the goodness in people, the willingness to speak up when something feels wrong, and the ability to find common ground even in difficult moments. Let's carry that spirit forward, not just here on this plane, but in our everyday lives." When Admiral Johnson finished speaking, the cabin erupted into applause. Passengers clapped enthusiastically, some rising to their feet in a standing ovation. For a brief moment, the confined space of the airplane felt vast, filled with unity and shared humanity. Even the flight crew joined in, their hands pressed together in gratitude for the reminder of why compassion mattered so much. Captain Sarah Collins sat quietly in her seat, watching the scene unfold with a mixture of pride and humility. She hadn't anticipated the ripple effect her actions would create, nor had she expected Admiral Johnson to turn the moment into something so meaningful. As the applause died down and passengers settled back into their seats, Sarah couldn't help but feel a renewed sense of purpose. This wasn't just a story about an airline mishap. It was a testament to the power of integrity, courage, and collective empathy. And as the plane soared through the sky, its passengers carried with them a memory that would stay long after the flight landed. Months after the incident on the plane, Admiral Marcus Johnson stood at a podium in the Pentagon, addressing an audience of military leaders, government officials, and civilians. The room was filled to capacity, with attendees hanging onto every word he spoke. This wasn't just another speech. It was a moment of reflection, gratitude, and inspiration. As Admiral Johnson recounted the events of that fateful flight, his voice carried both strength and vulnerability, reminding everyone present of the power of humility and unity. "I didn't expect that day to become anything more than a routine trip," he began, pausing briefly as if reliving the memory. "But sometimes, life has a way of teaching us lessons when we least anticipate them." That morning, I was reminded of two truths. First, that injustice still exists, even in places where it shouldn't. And second, that courage can come from the most unexpected places. He turned his gaze toward Captain Sarah Collins, who sat near the front row, her posture straight and proud. Smiling warmly, he continued, "When Captain Collins stepped forward on that plane, she didn't just defend me. She reminded all of us of our shared responsibility to stand up for one another. Her actions were bold, brave, and necessary. She showed us that allyship isn't passive, it's active. It's about speaking out, even when your voice trembles." The audience erupted into applause, their cheers echoing through the auditorium. Many people rose to their feet, clapping not only for Admiral Johnson, but also for Sarah, whose quiet determination had sparked so much change. When the applause finally subsided, Admiral Johnson shifted the focus back to the bigger picture. "This story isn't about me or Captain Collins," he emphasized, his tone firm yet gentle. "It's about what happens when ordinary people choose to do extraordinary things. It's about recognizing that progress doesn't happen overnight. It requires persistence, patience, and partnership. Each of you has the power to make a difference, whether it's in your workplace, your community, or your home." His words resonated deeply, especially among younger service members in attendance. For many, Admiral Johnson's message reinforced their belief in the importance of integrity and teamwork. Veterans nodded approvingly, remembering their own struggles and triumphs. Civilians left feeling inspired, vowing to carry the lesson of empathy into their daily lives. In the weeks that followed, Admiral Johnson and Captain Collins continued to champion causes close to their hearts. Together, they expanded pathways to leadership, bringing the program to bases across the country. They partnered with schools, nonprofits, and corporate organizations to promote diversity and inclusion beyond the military. Their efforts earned widespread recognition, including awards and honors, though neither sought personal glory. To them, success was measured by the number of lives touched, not trophies collected. For Captain Collins, the experience transformed her perspective on leadership. She realized that being a hero wasn't about dramatic gestures. It was about showing up consistently, even in small ways. Whether mentoring a nervous recruit or advocating for policy changes, she embraced every opportunity to lead by example. Her reputation grew within the Navy, earning her new opportunities to serve in advisory roles and speak at high-profile events. As for Admiral Johnson, the flight incident became a defining chapter in his storied career, a testament to his enduring resilience and grace under pressure. Yet he remained humble, always deflecting praise onto those around him. He often said, "A single tree cannot make a forest. True greatness comes from lifting others as you climb." Years later, the ripple effects of that day on the plane could still be felt. Pathways to leadership flourished, producing a new wave of confident, compassionate leaders. Conversations about equity and respect gained momentum, fueled by the courage of two individuals who refused to stay silent. And while Admiral Johnson eventually retired, his legacy lived on, not just in the medals displayed in museums, but in the countless lives he and Captain Collins had impacted. On the anniversary of the award ceremony, Sarah visited Admiral Johnson at his home. Over tea, they reminisced about the journey that had brought them together. "Do you think we made a difference?" Sarah asked quietly, her eyes searching his. Admiral Johnson smiled, placing a hand over hers. "Sarah," he said, "we didn't just make a difference. We started something that will keep growing long after we're gone. And that's what matters most." By the time the plane touched down in Washington, D.C., news of the incident had already begun to spread. Among the passengers was a journalist named Rachel Meyer, who had been traveling to cover a political conference. Rachel had witnessed the entire scene unfold: the initial mix-up with Admiral Johnson's seat, Captain Sarah Collins' bold intervention, and the Admiral's powerful response. As the passengers disembarked, Rachel approached Admiral Johnson respectfully, introducing herself and asking if she could share his story. At first, Marcus hesitated. He wasn't one to seek attention or fanfare, preferring to let his actions speak for themselves. But Rachel explained that stories like his mattered. They highlighted issues of fairness and respect, while inspiring others to stand up for what was right. After a brief pause, Admiral Johnson agreed, though he insisted the focus should be on collective progress rather than individual grievances. Rachel wrote her article that evening, capturing every detail of the day's events. She described the quiet dignity with which Admiral Johnson handled the situation, the fiery determination of Captain Collins, and the overwhelming support from fellow passengers. The piece was published online early the next morning under the headline, "Admiral Denied First-Class Seat. Pilot Stan Sparks National Conversation." Within hours, it went viral. Social media erupted with reactions. Thousands of people shared the story, praising Admiral Johnson's grace and Captain Collins' courage. Hashtags like #RespectOurHeroes and #Justice for Admiral Johnson began trending across platforms. Veterans, active duty service members, and civilians alike joined the conversation, sharing their own experiences of discrimination or bias in various settings. Many expressed outrage at how the airline had treated someone of Admiral Johnson's stature, while others celebrated his ability to rise above the situation with humility. The airline, caught off guard by the sudden wave of public scrutiny, scrambled to respond. They issued an official apology through multiple channels, acknowledging the error and promising to investigate the matter thoroughly. A spokesperson appeared on national television, reiterating their regret and emphasizing their commitment to ensuring such incidents never happened again. They offered Admiral Johnson a full refund, complimentary travel vouchers, and even a lifetime membership to their premium loyalty program. But to everyone's surprise, Marcus politely declined these gestures. "I appreciate the offer," he said in a brief statement provided to the airline, "but my concern is not about compensation. It's about creating meaningful change. I encourage the airline, and all organizations, to reflect on how they treat individuals, especially those who have served their country. Policies must evolve to prevent similar situations in the future." Meanwhile, Captain Sarah Collins found herself thrust into the spotlight as well. Her confrontation with the airline staff became a symbol of allyship and accountability. People praised her for stepping in when she saw injustice, calling her a hero in her own right. Requests poured in for interviews and speaking engagements, but Sarah remained modest. "I didn't do anything extraordinary," she told reporters during one brief appearance. "I simply stood up for what was fair. If more of us did that, imagine the kind of world we could build." As days turned into weeks, the impact of the story continued to grow. Schools incorporated the incident into discussions about leadership and ethics, using Admiral Johnson's words as a teaching moment. Military bases held workshops centered around diversity, equity, and inclusion, citing the event as proof that vigilance against prejudice was still necessary. Even corporate offices used the story as a case study in customer service and conflict resolution. For Admiral Johnson and Captain Collins, however, the real reward lay in the connections they forged because of the incident. The two exchanged contact information shortly after landing and stayed in touch, bonding over their shared values and experiences. They collaborated on initiatives aimed at mentoring young recruits, particularly women and minorities, encouraging them to pursue leadership roles within the military. Together, they reminded countless individuals that progress wasn't just about breaking barriers. It was about building bridges so others could follow. Though neither sought fame or recognition, their actions sparked something far greater: a renewed sense of hope and unity among those who believed in justice, equality, and the enduring power of doing what's right, even in the face of adversity.